You may have been wondering, since we took up our harvest offering, I think it was two Sundays ago, and then we heard something, I'd forgotten. Something with IOUs in the basket. I just thought, I had never heard of people putting IOUs in the church basket, but they did, and so other folks, they'd just forgotten, and so the total, I got the privilege of telling you the total, we brought in for harvest offering $50,000, which I go, yeah. Actually, it was $49,996. So somebody shorted God $4. I want to know, who was it? Anyway, we're good with that. You may have saw across the road when you came in this morning that there's some dirt that's been moved. Did some of you see that? Oh, a big pile of dirt across there. And we decided, and I probably should just let you know that as a part of the, we want to build a new church, but we thought the most important thing going into this was putting up a swimming pool for the pastoral staff. And so this first $50,000 is going to the pool, and just so you wouldn't take it by surprise. On that, anyway. So you're thinking, where does this guy come up with? I don't know. We're in this part of 1 Peter, and the whole theme of 1 Peter, if you've been here for a while, you kind of know, and some of you may be tired of when we're talking about submission, and then talking about suffering, and then even then this morning in serving, and I don't want to hear about submission, and I don't want to hear about. But this is the great thing of working through a book of the Bible, and that you don't get to just pick and choose what you want to talk about or what you think people may want to hear. When you work through it, if you do it any justice at all, and I'll just say this, even working through it, I can't do justice to everything. There's just way too much that's there. But it comes up, and you just can't do an end around. You just have to talk about it, and it's in the Bible because God wants us to know this stuff. And if it's not, there's so much stuff, if it wasn't in the Bible, we wouldn't know it, or we wouldn't believe it, or we wouldn't think it's true, or we wouldn't pay any attention, because there's so much there, you just stop and you go, what in the world? It makes you do a double take. Maybe you have to read it 3 times or 10 times and go, what does this mean? And it always means something, right? It always means something. For people, it's not that you can't read the Bible, because if you can read it. The issue is, what does it mean? The issue is always interpretation. So I read it, I know what it means, or I know what it says, but what does it mean? And so this morning we're continuing on this part. We have left submission. We're into suffering. And here again, nobody wants to suffer. If you wanted to suffer, I'd say, I think you have other issues, right? Never yet did anyone ever want to be in any more pain. In fact, we want to reduce pain. We want to minimize pain. We want to get outside of pain. We want to get away from people that cause us pain, right? That's the way it is. I'll just tell you this. In some cultures, in some countries of the world, they have a philosophy in that culture. It's called fatalism. And in fatalism, a lot of Oriental countries, fatalism means we expect things to go wrong. We expect to suffer. So when it happens, when it visits you, don't be surprised. Because you know it's going to happen. You just didn't know what form it would take. You didn't know when it was going to happen, but you know it's going to happen. That's fatalism. The very opposite's here in the United States of America. We don't expect to suffer at all. We should be exempt. Why? We're Americans, for crying out loud, right? We shouldn't have to. Land of the free and home of the brave and all this stuff. And so guess what? We too, we're not exempt from suffering just because we are the United States of America and we're Americans and it's a great country. Yeah, it is. But we're still going to have to suffer. Even more so if you name the name of Christ and you live for Him. There will be ways where you're going to have to suffer because of that. Really? Yeah, really. And I think people need to know that. So when it happens, you don't think, well, what went wrong? How come I'm not walking with God? How come God's not being good to me? Talked to a lady just this past week, and oh man, it was bad. A couple years ago, they had lost their teenage daughter. She had cancer, and she died. And went and talked with her, and now. All the pain and the grief, it's not like it's gone away just because it's been a few years here. And we're talking about trusting God, and she said this, but I trusted God with my daughter, and she still died. I go, yeah. Just because you trust God doesn't mean that things still don't. Well, then why trust God? Can you trust God, not that something won't happen, but even if it does happen, He won't abandon you? Can you trust God that when things do happen, He'll still take care of your loved ones, although they may not still walk on this earth? Trusting God doesn't mean you get to predict or pray in what you want to happen. There's just this mistaken notion of trusting God means, and if I pray hard enough and get enough people to agree with me, and if I have enough faith, well, I can dictate to basically God how it should turn out. It does not work that way. I wish it did. I just say, but it doesn't. The problem then, if that's what you think and things still happen, you may abandon your faith. You may abandon your God, you may abandon the church, you may abandon your Bible because you'll say, but I did that and look what happened. And I'm still, reeling from the incident. And there's a lot of people that allow one incident, although it's tragic, to define their life. The incident that should define our lives is the salvation incident. And not other kinds of things, although I understand they do have impact. Don't let that run your life. So this morning, here, get ready to suffer. Get ready to suffer. There are not a lot of best-selling books on the market these days that have to do with suffering. I don't know if there's any. They just don't sell very well. We just don't want to think about it. Therefore, let's push it aside, but you're still going to suffer anyway. And the problem, if you never think about it, when it hits you, you're not prepared. So I'm just telling you now, just get ready. There's wisdom in getting ready. In fact, where we are in 1 Peter, it speaks of that. It says, you know what? Since Christ has suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves. Also with the same purpose, because he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. And go, well, there's a lot that's there. That's right. In every verse of Scripture, there's a lot that's there. First, Christ has suffered in the flesh. And the flesh there means actually body. Flesh doesn't always mean body in Scripture, but here it means body. Since Christ has suffered in His body, you arm yourself. Here it's like you put on. You put something on with the same purpose, because the same thing's going to happen to you. You get ready because it's going to happen. Don't let it take you by surprise, because I'm telling you now, it shouldn't. You realize weather's gotten colder lately, and some people actually like it. They do. And I just want to sit down and have a conversation with them. I don't get it. When it gets below 40, I'm sitting there, God, I'm having this conversation with God. But, some people like the cold weather. Here's a real kicker. Some people actually like snow. Did you know that? Don't put your hand up. Don't put your hand up. Hey, listen, I realize if you're like a student in school, y'all are praying every night for snow, so you get a snow day, right? You have enough of them, then what happened? You got to make them up later. So wise up. Okay. You guys are texting, pray it snows, pray. You guys are texting all the time, aren't you? Yeah, you are. Don't lie to me. But, I used to like snow, I guess, when I was real little, when you didn't have to drive and you could sled in it and make forts through snow. There was a time when snow was kind of cool. It's been a long time ago. If I never saw a snowflake for the rest of my life, I would be a happy man. But it's still going to happen. It's still going to happen. There was no snow where? In the Garden of Eden. Meaning snow, what? Follow with me theologically here. Snow is a result of the fall. Snow is sin, okay? Sin. Jesus died for snow. I may go a little too far, but it's bad stuff. Oh, it's so pretty. No, it's not. No, it's not. If it could come down like multicolored, that would be cool. Blue and red and violet, that would be kind of neat. It's just all white. It's just all white. So what? But since it's gotten cold, you better arm yourself. You better put something on before you go outside. Put on a jacket. Put on long pants. Some of you guys wear shorts clear through the winter because you think you're so tough. You're not, right? I'm tough. I can wear shorts although it's minus 20 out. Well, sure you can, but you're not very smart. Put on. Right? Am I right? I'm right. You put on long pants, don't you, Lance? Of course you do. You're a smart guy. Of course, your mom's sitting next to you. What you gonna do? But most of us have enough sense. Put on a jacket. Put on a hat. Wear long pants. Put on some boots. We have enough. Because if you don't, you're going to get cold and you might catch a cold. And I'll go, you be sorry, right? You be sorry. And I think what we're talking about here is in the same way, you better arm yourself. You better put something on. You better be ready for when suffering comes, because if you're not ready when it hits you, it will blindside you. You won't see it coming. It'll hit you so hard. There's Dan Blocker right over there, right, Dan? That's your name? Okay. I remember one time playing football. I played on the same team that Dan's brother played on, Dave. Dave Blocker was a great football player. He was a great football player. And one time at practice, I'm going after somebody. I didn't see it coming. And Dave Blocker hit me so hard, it made my family hurt. Okay? I never will forget that. He hit me. I didn't see him come. He hit me so hard, and I didn't know if I was going to ever get up from that. I just remember that. I just remember that to this day. He was good and he hit hard. And I remember after he hit me, he had like a smile on his face. He was that good. And he went on to play college ball and all that. He was that good. But anyway, you want to see it coming, because if you don't, it'll be like getting hit by Dan's brother. You don't see it coming, go wham. And here again, I can remember that. All these years later, I can remember. I can still feel it. Sort of. So put something on. And so I want to talk about how to arm yourself. It's not as hard as you might think. But here's the thing when it comes from suffering, and you know this already. You don't have to look for suffering because it will find you. You know that. You don't have to go, okay, suffer, where am I going to suffer? turning over rocks and looking under place. It will come. You can be minding your own business. You can be a nice person. You can live for God. And you might think that'll exempt you for suffering, but that's not true. It will find you out. And when you're minding your own business and you're a nice person and you're living for God and suffering finds you out, you might think that's just not fair. And part of it isn't just suffering. This is suffering because you followed Jesus. Because don't just suffer just to suffer, or just because you suffer think it's all right. It's not this. We're talking about a particular kind of suffering. It's suffering for making the choice. I'm going to live for God. When suffering, part of it, when you live for God, you're not only not exempt for suffering, you're a target for suffering. If you live for Christ, you are a target. If you go to church, there will be people in your network of relationships or where you work, they know you go to church. They know you go to church. And they're oftentimes watching to see how you act, how you respond, what comes out of your mouth. Because you're sort of naming the name of Christ, or they may not be saying it. They know you go to church. And so they're watching. And they're trying to figure out if you're all that different, or is it just a bunch of nonsense? Are you any better than them, or what? Is your vocabulary worse than even theirs? See, when suffering for Christ, take on the same attitude that Christ had, that is, be willing to accept suffering if it's for Christ. Here, not any kind of suffering, but when it's suffering for having followed Christ, accept it as being God's will, because we should accept or expect to suffer for Him. Here's why. When we suffer for Him, we are most like Him. Isn't that true? When we suffer for Him, we're most like Him. There's something about suffering and the pain of suffering that gets our attention, doesn't it? Pain gets our attention. Pain never leaves us the same way that it found us. I went to see a surgeon about 3 weeks ago because certain things I got going on in my back and my legs and my feet. It's been troubling me now for a while. I had an MRI done, and so I don't know what's going on. And so I went and I saw one of the best surgeons in Fort Wayne. I get in there. He goes, "Oh, my partner operated on you back in 91. I'm going, well, okay. He was kind of excited. My partner operated on you. Well, all right. Bottom line, he says, you don't need to have one. It's not, you're not in pain, are you? I'm not in pain. I got this issue and that issue, and kind of wobble like a weeble sometimes, but I don't fall down. And they go, well, all right then, you're not falling down, you're not in pain. I go, we're not doing that. So if you think that all surgeons are just scalpel happy, they're not all. Some of them are. Some get a big smile on their face, but this guy wasn't. And I was glad, but it got my attention enough to where I had a test done. I'm going to go talk to someone to see, because if I don't have to suffer anymore, I don't want to, right? Of course. But he says it's not to that point, and so we'll just leave it go as now. We'll see what takes on. But I mean, it got my attention. Some of you right now, you have certain things going on. It has your attention, doesn't it? You bet it does. It almost like it dominates your life, doesn't it? You know that it does. It's about the only thing you think about, or it's not very far from your consciousness. It's there, it's there, it's there, it's there. You pray more now, don't you? You go, uh-huh. See, when you suffer, you just pray more, don't you? And if you say no, you haven't suffered much. That's what happens. You have a different perspective on life and people and the purpose of being on this earth. It just grabs you some. We don't like it, but there's just something that suffering does that like nothing else can compare. So yeah, when we suffer for Him, for Him. We identify with Him, and at that point, we're most like Him. Here's my question. Do you really want to be like Jesus? If it requires suffering, and for some people, I'm out. That's when I'm gone. I liked the whole Christianity thing as long as I kept benefiting from it. But once I had to pay a price, I'm out. That's a misunderstanding of the gospel. It's a misunderstanding of life. Expect to. If you refuse, you won't be much like Him. You won't be much use to Him. When I decided years ago that I wanted to go to a Bible college and I didn't know which one to pick, back in those days there was no internet, right? So you actually had to do the hard work of putting something in the mail and sending it away, and they would send you something back in the mail. Remember those days, some of you, right? Really? Life was like that? Yeah, it was like that. And I remember the brochure I got from the college I ended up eventually going to, and it said this. It says, it takes more than a little Bible to get the big job done. And I go, and it wasn't that alone. I go, that's right. It takes more than a little Bible to get the big job done. If you think a little Bible can get the job done, you don't understand the job. You don't understand the job. And so anyway, and end up going there. But part of it, if you want to be most like Him, it's going to take a little more than a little Bible, and it's going to take more than probably a little bit of suffering. Now, sometimes our suffering comes from non-Christians outside the church. And sometimes our suffering comes from Christians or non-Christians masquerading as Christians inside the church. If you have been a part of church for any length of time, you know of which I speak. Which is the greatest suffering? From those who are non-Christians outside the church, or those who are Christians who are non-Christians masquerading as Christians from within inside the church? Where do you think the greatest suffering is to be found? Outside or inside? Inside. It's like always inside. Why is that? How could this be? Well, we all have thoughts, but it's just true. I can hardly stand the thought, and probably you can't either, but it's just true. But here's why it's important to suffer for Christ, even if it's inside the church. That is, he who has suffered in the flesh has ceased from sin. There used to be this talk years ago about the eradication of sin. We don't even use those words anymore. What do you mean the eradication of sin? Meaning doing away with sin. You don't eradicate it. You just learn to live with it. It's not that bad. No. The eradication of sin. He who has suffered in the body has ceased from sin. Does it mean they don't sin at all anymore? It doesn't mean that. And I think we all want to cease from sin, but suffering for Jesus is one of His primary ways to get us to not sin as much. It should cause us to turn to and to cry out to God. All the more so when we know that the suffering is on account of following Him. Some suffering we bring upon ourselves, right? Some suffering we bring upon ourselves, we don't intentionally want to, but because of, let's say, who knows, circumstances in life, personality issues, whatever it might be. We all have stuff to work through, don't we? Some people refuse to work through it, and they blame everybody else because of the suffering in their life. But we all have issues to work through. There's no exceptions to that. And so sometimes we bring it upon ourselves. Other times it's not, we didn't bring it upon us. We just walked with God, and it came and found us anyway. But it causes you to focus on, to give God more attention, and that will often break the sinful patterns that reside within us. Anybody here have sinful patterns? Uh-huh. Uh-huh. We all do. We don't like them. Maybe you've been fighting them for a long time, but suffering for Christ is a huge way to break a sinful pattern that's in your life. Suffering for Jesus, when accepted, has a cleansing effect and diminishes some of the strongholds that sin has over you. Here, ever been called names for following Jesus? Ever been called names? Ever been ridiculed for coming to church? Anyone ever rolled their eyes or sort of giggled because you're one of them? In this age of reason and scientific proof, and you're off chasing a fairy tale. You know what? Jesus is just another name for Santa Claus. Didn't you get over Santa Claus back in like first grade? You're still running after Santa Claus? Ha ha ha. Ha ha ha. Ever been slapped in the face for following? I mean slapped. Ever been demoted or fired from your job for having followed Jesus? Ever not got a job? I remember I just got out of Bible college in South Carolina. I'm going to apply for a job. And they knew that I just graduated. And as I'm interviewing, they says, you know what? Don't you be forcing Jesus down our throat. Well, I decided I'm not going to work there. Not that I was going to force Jesus down anybody's throat, but I'm sure in the world not going to hold back from speaking my mind or living accordingly. It may not be what we always want to hear, but if we don't, we just won't be ready. And then when suffering hits us, we won't know how to handle it. We'll fly off the handle. I'll tell you this. Every single pastor I have ever known has both sacrificed greatly and has suffered greatly for having followed Jesus. Is this true? This is true. Some of you came from families. You're PKs. You know what a PK is? Pastor's kids. There's MKs. MK is a missionary's kids. What's worse than being an MK? PK. That's just sort of the slang that's out there. And if you're a PK, not only have you seen your father or your mother suffer or them suffer together, you too have suffered to have seen them suffered. I have never, ever, ever met a pastor who's pastored more than 2 weeks. There is what's called a honeymoon period. It's about 2 weeks in a good church. That have not suffered for being a pastor. And when you suffer, your spouse suffers. I'll tell you, my wife's not here. I tell her almost nothing that goes on here or in any other church. She got used to it. Why? I don't want to. It's not good for her. Let me put it that way. She won't handle it that well. She'll be all worked up about stuff. And she'll want to do drive-by stuff, you know. I don't want her doing that. So I don't tell her hardly anything. And people wonder why we burn out, why we get depressed, why we go get a business degree, or we work the drive-up window at McDonald's. People wonder. Just talk to anyone that's done it for any time, and they'll tell you stories you won't even believe. Next time you go through McDonald's, if you go to McDonald's, and the drive-up guy says, "You want any fries with that?" And you go, "That voice sounds familiar. It's probably your former pastor." That's probably who it is, okay? That's what he's doing. It's easier working the drive-up window at McDonald's than it is to lead a church. Can I just tell you that? The other thing, you can always just put a fry in your mouth. No one knows. I mean, there's just all these benefits. Probably working McDonald's. Now, let me tell you something else. This isn't just for pastors. It's for all people who've gone all out or they're all in for Jesus. I mean, I want to make the call. Are you all in? Okay. Are you all out for Christ? Because if you are, together, we can do anything. Really. Isn't nobody stopping us except us? The world, they don't really give a rip what we do. They're not paying any attention anyway. Don't blame it on them. They don't even know we exist. What do they care? So we took in 50,000 for harvest. They don't care. Take in 100,000, take in 10 million. They don't care. But if you're not all out or you're not all in, come on. There are those who would rather lose an appendage than be outside of God's will. Really, there is. I thought I was serious about God until I got to Bible college. Every single kid there, they would rather have lost an arm or a leg than to be outside of God's will. I mean, that's what I thought. I mean, these folks are serious. It was kind of like a missionary Bible college. I didn't know that when I got there. I probably wouldn't have went to that one. But all these missionary kids hanging around. Those folks just serious. Serious. That year, one of the graduates of that college had been martyred on the mission field. He had died. They'd killed him. And his brother and his sister were still students there. I remember my first year roommate, he says, "I expect to be killed on the mission field." I mean, I go, what? What are you talking about? Man, those folks are serious. Life is short. Hell is hot. And the world needs to hear about the good news in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And don't you sit there and say, "Well, that's your job." No, it's not my job. I'll tell you whose job it is. It's our job. Why don't we do our job? I'm just going to stop there. Why don't we do our job? Yeah, we're going to suffer. Expect to. Arm yourself with the attitude, it's all right. It's okay. He did. We should. Every single day, there are people, and you know some of them, and they're leaving this earth. And we're not sure where their eternal destiny lies. We want to think that. We want to hope that. And in some churches say, well, they were baptized. Baptism in and of itself does not save anyone. Never has, never will. I'm not saying don't get baptized, but it's an outward sign of an inner reality that happens after you've become a Christ follower. It does not make you a Christ follower. We don't know. We can always have hope, but we can't always have assurance, correct? And also, God would always rather redeem than condemn. That's the kind of God He is. We can have hope always, but we can't always have assurance. And knowing that God would always rather redeem than condemn. I'm so glad I have a God just like that. Last night, I'm just thinking and praying, and my mom's been gone almost a couple years now, and I don't have assurance, but I have hope. And while I was talking to God, I go, God, are you taking care of my mom? Are you taking care of her? And there's this way too many young people today that are taking their lives and they're strung out on drugs. There's just way too many. And here's my ask. Can we be a church that cares enough to say, that's it? We're going to do what we can. And it doesn't mean we don't care about the elderly folks. It doesn't mean that. But can we be a church that cares enough about people and about young people who live in despair and darkness, and they wake up in a cloud every morning, and they go to sleep in a cloud every night? Can we be a church who cares enough to do something about it? What that's going to be, I don't know for sure. But we can do something, and it can make a difference. Because if you're like me, I am sick and tired of hearing about young people who take their lives and are strung out on drugs. I'm sick of it. And I think you are too. Could we just be a group of God's people who sit there, we're going to fire hot in this. Because life is short and hell is hot and people need to hear the gospel. That's why. And if we decide to do it, we're not going to be able to impact everyone, but we will be able to impact someone. We make that our mission. We are going to reduce the number of people who spend eternity in a bad, nasty place. We're just going to reduce the number on that. And then we're going to disciple. We're going to bring them into discipleship, where the greatest joy they'll ever experience is experienced in the reality of Christ. The greatest adventure, I believe, still of this world is following Him. It's the greatest adventure. I don't need a bucket list. I just need one thing, and to do it well. And it's to follow after Him with all my heart, mind, strength. Would you pray with me? Lord, I thank You this morning for Your greatness and Your goodness. And You just love us so much. I don't want anyone leaving here this morning think that God doesn't love them so much. It's not true. Even if you're suffering, it doesn't mean He doesn't love you. He loves you so much. He did something about it. He sent his Son to die on our behalf. Then he was risen from the grave, ascended into heaven. He left some people down here to spread the news, and we've been doing that for a couple thousand years now. Sometimes we've done it well, other times not so well. But could we be all in? Could we go all out? And do the one thing he's called us to do, and that's make disciples. Let's do it together. I pray it now in Christ's name.